So we're going to pick up where we left off. We've talked about periods and phrases, but before we do that, let's kind of review what we've talked about. This is the notes sheet that's available in the week one folder. And we've been working from smallest musical ideas all the way up to largest, like periods. And then today we're going to go and analyze melodic structure. So, how do melodies work to become interesting and what are their natural tendencies? So here we just to review, we talked about motive, which is the smallest musical unit that keeps happening throughout a piece. Thinking of Beethoven's fifth, the da 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 dum line is one of the most popular motives. Motives can be rhythmic and melodic, and sometimes we can work together and form sequences, which are just ideas that get repeated higher or lower, and we might change keys while we do the sequence, which is a real sequence. We're using the exact intervals, or we might stay within the same key and just use notes from our scale. The sequence can change, or we can use notes from the original idea and then change the rest, which would be a false sequence. And then we moved into larger ideas, which were phrases. Phrases are just complete musical ideas that end with a cadence and are typically 4 measures long, 4 to 8 measures, but it just depends. Composers have the right to make phrases as long as they want. Maybe it's 3 measures, maybe it's five. You can break phrases down into smaller ideas like phrase members. Maybe phrase member is a part of a sequence that could happen. And then phrases work together to form periods if these three conditions are met. Just note that these first two are basically saying the same thing. A second phrase ends with a strong cadence, and the first phrase must have a weak cadence, and the two phrases should sound similar. If they do form a period, it's typically one of these four. Usually it's one of these two. It's a parallel period if both of the phrases are starting the same way. It's a contrasting period if they're starting differently, and then maybe we have two phrases that are weak and the next one is strong. So that would be a three phrase period. And maybe we have three phrases that are weak and the final one is the strongest one, and they're all working together with similar material. Then we'd have a double period where we have four phrases within a group. If phrases do not meet the conditions above and they just happen to be side by side, it's either a repeated phrase, like an exact repeat with the exact same cadence, or it's just called non period construction. They're phrases that are in the song, but they're just not really working together. To be creative, composers tend to extend phrases, which relieve some of the predictability of the piece, or they might change mode. They can extend phrase at the beginning, the middle, or the end, or they might just make it major to minor or minor to major. Today, we're going to look at how melodies function and what are their typical tendencies. So if we go here, and I'm going to scroll down really fast and try to find chapter 6. Here's chapter 7, went too far. Isn't this fun? Look how fast I can go. Typically, if I were thinking ahead, I would have pulled this up ahead of time, but of course I'm not because Schoology's crashing like mad right now. I blame it on the elementary teachers. They're all logging on at once and they slept in. Here we go. So, melodic structure. The first point is that melodies tend to work up to a high point and then back down. They tend to ascend to what's called a climax tone and then go back down. So in this example here, we had notes that led up to our climax tone, which was a D flat, and then went back down. So here's our climax tone, here's an ascent, and here's a descent. This helps to inform our performance practice because as a musician, if I were playing this, I would kind of build a crescendo in there and highlight that climax tone, bring it out, and then kind of fade away with a decrescendo. Um, most phrases contain an ascent and a descent from the climax tone. So we had that here, and we also have that here in this example of Beethoven. All right. So we are leading up and leading down, and there's our climax tone right there. The next part is saying that melodies typically highlight the members of the different triads. So in this particular melody right here, we are highlighting the one chord. So all these circled notes are members of that one triad, the G minor triad. G, B flat, G, B flat, G, B flat, D, B flat, G, G, and so on. So we tend to, that helps us remember what key we're in. Another characteristic of melodies is that as we approach the tonic, so here we're in the key of A minor, and as we're approaching a tonic, we tend to do it in a 3-2-1 pattern. Take a listen to this. This one happens to end 3-2-1. Sometimes we don't do that, but that just might be because we're on a different cadence. This one ends in a half cadence, the one we heard earlier. So we go 3-2, but we stop on the 2 because we don't want to resolve because this is a half cadence. F is part of the 5 chord in the key of E flat. Um, that alludes to the fact that we might do 3-2-1 later. If this were a 4-minute parallel period, maybe the last time we'd go to 3-2-1. Here, something interesting that Bach does is he embeds the 3-2-1 throughout these two phrases. And he also puts it at the end. So listen to this. Interesting. So we have 3, 2. This song is slowly descending. Each time we have melodic material, it takes us down a little bit lower and then finally ends on the 1. And then to cap it all off, we have 3-2-1 right there. So those are the main characteristics of what we were talking about. Let's see where we're right here. So we're looking for climax tones, which you'll be doing in your assignment. You're looking for ascent and descent. And then you're going to look, where are we emphasizing the pitches of the tonic triad, the 1, 3, and 5? And then are we seeing phrases that are concluding with 3, 2, and 1? These are just natural musical tendencies that lots of composers engage in to keep their melodies interesting. And you will notice those in pieces you're performing. And as you notice them, when you see ascent and descent, even if one's not written, you'll probably want to do like a slight crescendo, decrescendo. You want to bring out climax tones when you finally get to the high point. And you'll want to kind of bring out those tonic triad notes that remind the audience of what key you're in. And then take your time sometimes at the end of phrases when you see the 3-2-1. You can build in a retard right there. So all of these things, as we recognize them in our music, are going to inform our practice. The last part of your chapter just says that music has not always been nicely organized into 4-measure phrases. This is a little excerpt which never would have looked this way, but from the Fitzwilliam Virginal book. Incidentally, Madonna wanted to call her first album Like a Virginal, but that got kiboshed when her producers heard about that. But in the Baroque era, we started to see nicely organized phrases. And then the classical period was mainly about balancing music. Everything had to be balanced between an A section, a B section, 4-measure phrase, 4-measure phrase, period. Everything had to be predictable and the audience had to be able to follow along. We didn't like lots of surprises in the classical period, but of course, we had people like Haydn and Beethoven and Mozart that still like to throw in things to show off their creativity. That desire from balance carried us all the way into modern times. As we see the song by Johnny Cash, nice 4-measure phrases here, and then finally an end. And that continued or was preceded by jazz, where we had the big band era, preceded by ragtime New Orleans. But then Charlie Parker liked to challenge our ears with things that we had not heard before, using regular chord progressions, but changing modes and stuff over the top of them. So you'll always see people that stuck with the status quo, and then some people decide to challenge it by giving our ears things to listen for that we had not heard yet. So that's the basics of this part of the chapter. Your assignments will be based on these things, and then we'll have a quiz coming up soon.